So in the footballing world, a lot of different things are being talked about at the moment in terms of how we're actually going to be able to complete this season. In the Premier League, they're talking about playing games at neutral grounds, but even that's been knocked back recently with the news that another Brighton player has come down with coronavirus. The EFL has basically said about League 1 and League 2 that there's going to be no feasible way those games are going to be able to play, so it's looking more than likely that they'll be going off points per game to decide how those league tables are going to be finished. So what I thought we'd do for today's video is look at the Championship and apply the same scenario to the league. So we'll go off average points per game. It's a weighted system which takes into consideration how many points teams pick up at home and how many away, and it adds them both together. And then at the end it comes up with a league table which makes for quite interesting reading really. If we look at how League 1 would finish if the system was to be applied, that would see Coventry, Rotherham and Oxford United promoted to the Championship based on a weighted points per game system. So obviously what they're suggesting there is the playoffs aren't played and the team that finishes in third does get promotion. So throughout the video we're going to be discussing sort of the positives and negatives of this system if it was to be applied to the Championship. I want to know from you guys, I'll leave a poll for you guys to vote on, if there was like no way that the remaining fixtures could be played, how do you think the fairest way would be to finish this season? I'll leave a few scenarios for you to vote on. But without any further ado, let's look at how the Championship table would actually finish should we use points per game. So we'll start out at the bottom of the Championship and then work our way upwards. So if we were going off points per game, then the bottom three would be as it is at the moment actually. So we'd have Barnsley finishing bottom with 41.96 points. Above that we then got Luton and Charlton. Now the awkwardness and one of the downfalls of points per game is it doesn't take into consideration the difficulty of fixtures that these clubs have still got left. So obviously there's still 9 games to play in the Championship. Charlton is probably the most interesting one to look at as they are currently the closest to safety. In real life they're just 2 points away from Hull, who are sat in 21st in the table at the moment. And if we actually look at some of the games that Charlton have got left, obviously we all know coming into this before football got suspended, Hull were on an awful run of form and looked destined to drop into that bottom 3 at one point. But some of the games that Charlton had left would have been season defining. So they still had a game against Hull, few teams to play mid-table, and a massive crunch match at the Valley on the second to last day of the season at home against Wigan Athletic. If for argument's sake we say that football got suspended a week after it actually did and Charlton beat Hull away from home, the points per game system would be completely flipped on its head then, and it would see Charlton surviving. So right there you're already seeing one of the downfalls of the points per game system. So would it be fair to relegate teams based on that? With Luton and Barnsley it's a bit of a different argument as they are obviously a lot further away from safety at the moment, with Luton being 6 points and Barnsley 7 points. Although even saying that, we all know as football fans that we've seen some ridiculous, escapes on the last day of this season in the Championship, and who's to say that they wouldn't have gone to do the same? If we then look at the teams who would just survived based on this, the table gets even more interesting for reading. So we actually see Hull going above Middlesbrough in the rankings here, and another downfall of points per game is it doesn't take into consideration current form of a club. So the reason we see Hull going up one place is because at the start of the season their form at home was pretty decent. It was reasonable. At the start of the season the K-Can was a pretty tough place to go to, and so that's heavily factored into how many points Hull pick up from now until the end of the season based on this system. If we are basing it on actual real life form, Hull hadn't won any of their last 11 matches in the Championship. Ever since the new year they were really spiralling down the table, but this system actually sees them finishing fairly well. The other clubs we then got in there surviving, obviously Middlesbrough just about scraping it, then we got Wigan, Stoke and Huddersfield. And if you actually look at the amount of points that these clubs finishing on, it shows that the margin for error is ridiculously small. We've got 3 clubs on there finishing on 51 points, so they're all separated by a decimal point. Is there an argument to be made that you can promote teams based on points per game but you can't relegate them based on it? I don't know, it's a debate to be had in the comments down below. I know a lot of fans of Premier League clubs are discussing that at the moment. Can you give Liverpool the title whilst not relegating 3 clubs? If we then continue to go up the table, we got the teams finishing in mid-table here. So we got Birmingham, Reading, Sheffield Wednesday, QPR and Derby County all making up the rest of the bottom half of the table in this one. It's difficult to remain completely neutral on debates like this as well, because I think that everyone everyone's got a horse in the race. Even teams who are sat in mid-table and don't particularly have much to play for, they may see how one of their rivals would be affected by this, and so that would lead to a bit of bias here and there. Even me as a Preston fan, obviously I'd be advocating for something to happen where the playoffs will be able to get played, because that would allow us to have a chance of promotion. So I think that everyone comes into this from a little bit of biasness. And so the fairest way of deciding this season, it's a really hard one to come up with for me. Whatever the plan is to do, I think that someone is going to be disadvantaged, you know, somewhere down the footballing ladder, somewhere. If we then look at the teams who would be just missing out on the top 6, we've then got Blackburn Rovers, Swansea, Millwall, Cardiff and Bristol City. Now once again, this also brings up an interesting talking point, because points per game doesn't take into consideration momentum towards the end of the season. If we look at the league table from this point last year, Leeds was sat top of the Championship and Aston Villa were sat 10th in the Championship, and we all know what went on to happen. You know, Leeds weren't promoted despite being top, and Aston Villa, even being all that way away from the top 6, went on a miraculous run towards the end of the season, ended up getting promoted at Wembley. So if the same scenario happened last season, we'd have, you know, Leeds would have been promoted and Villa would have been nowhere near it. Making up the playoff positions then, we've got Preston North End, Nottingham Forest, Brentford and Fulham. So Preston just getting in there, Bristol City finishing on 68.33 points and Preston finishing on 69.13. So once again, the margin for errors are really small. Obviously in real life, the top 6 race was seriously hotting up. It was absolutely bonkers. No one seemed to be able to string together a couple of performances. And then we actually get into talking about the top 6. This brings up a whole nother debate, you know. Should the season be decided on points per game? How do you then go about separating the teams in the playoffs? Do you go ahead and play those games despite not playing out the season? Or do you say that can't be done and you have to promote the team that finishes in 3rd place? In this example, that would be Fulham, who are, you know, a little bit ahead of Brentford, Forest and Preston in this estimation. But would that be fair to deny those other 3 clubs? It's another interesting one. Could you have one-off games between these ones to decide who gets promoted out of all of them at neutral venues? It's another argument to be had. And then if we go ahead and look at the top 2, we got West Brom finishing in 2nd and Leeds United finishing in 1st place. So there's a lot of different arguments to be had here, you know. One that keeps being brought up is void the season. For me personally, that's still the last option, you know. How can you abandon a season which we're 37 games into? I think there's too much at stake for all those games to be written off as, you know, meaningless. Another argument that's been had by some Premier League fans is, could you, let's say for argument's sake, not relegate anyone from the Premier League but promote the top 2 from the Championship? That also then opens up a whole new can of worms. I mean, it was actually reported the other week that the FA board would actually block any attempt to null and void this season or to scrap relegation from the Premier League, so it doesn't look like that could be a possibility if the FA aren't going to play along with that. So as we see on screen now, those would be the final standings in the Championship should we take into consideration a weighted points per game system where your home form and your away form based on the games you've already played are added up and taken into consideration. Would you think that would be a fair way to end the Championship if there was absolutely no way that games could be played? Do you think it'd be fair if we null and voided this season, if we took the reverse fixture results to decide things, if we went on current standings? A lot of different things have been suggested, but I am interested to hear what you guys have to say about it. So as always, get your thoughts in the comments down below as to what you think should happen. But obviously the ideal scenario would be that these games do get to be played out in their entirety, and something that the government has actually announced today is that no professional sport in England can take place until June the 1st. Now what a lot of people have took that as and sort of spun the headline is that football will be returning immediately after that, which may not be the case. In the ideal situation though, we could be seeing football back in June, and at the moment it seems like the Championship and the Premier League are one thing and League 1 and League 2 are another. It seems like they're both like different entities. Obviously, well, like we mentioned before, what the Premier League has been suggesting is playing these games behind closed doors at neutral venues, but obviously in both scenarios there's going to be, you know, absolutely no way that fans are going to be able to be at the stadium or gather outside or anything like that. So football could return in June, but the document does go on to say that this will only be possible though if sufficient progress is made in limiting the spread of the virus between now and then. So there's a lot of ifs, buts and maybes in between if we're going to get football back then. In terms of fans being able to go to the games, what the document has said that the government put out said that this may only be possible significantly later depending on the reduction in the number of infections. To be honest, I think I'd do anything to get football back right now. It's been an absolute age since I watched a football match. It's not the same when you're watching it at home through iFollow, you know, compared to being in the stadium there, but if that's what it takes for us to get this season finished, I don't see how anyone can go against it, really. But that is all the recent information that has been put out about when football is potentially returning. And so, you know, we've talked about today if the games can't be played, what would happen, and if the games could be played, what would also happen there. So get your thoughts in the comments down below. But like I said, guys, I will now wrap it up for today's video. So if you're going to enjoy, please do leave a like. It is always massively appreciated. Continue to leave your video suggestions for future videos that you'd like to see in the comments down below. I'm always interested to see what you guys would like to see. But apart from that, make sure to subscribe for a bit of regular championship content, and I'll see you all in the next one.